Do you ever feel like the Israelites, like you're wandering aimlessly in the wilderness and getting nowhere? Are you looking for a life filled with promise, searching for the same freedom the children of Israel sought, only to find oppression at every turn? Well, you're not alone, because we are all on a journey. Ours is not a journey from slavery to Egypt to the promised land of Israel, but it's a journey from slavery to sin to the ultimate promised land in heaven. And let's face it, everything in between is a wilderness experience. And there are few people whose lives are covered in the Bible from birth until death. Moses is among the ranks. In these 13 lessons, Dr. Mark Rasmussen takes us on a journey with Moses from the palace to the very edge of the promised land. Come climb Mount Sinai. Let's trek through the hot wilderness and learn truths about friendship and idolatry and God's miraculous provision. And through it all, we will see the incredible, never-failing faithfulness of a God who will be with you every step of your journey. When people take their eyes off the true God, they are prone to the most heinous sins imaginable. God will always judge sin and deal with it severely, but the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man always avails much. One man's intercession can bring God's mercy in the midst of judgment. Today we're going to examine three things: the iniquity of the people, the indignation of God, and the intercession of Moses. So let's start in our text. We're going to read Exodus 32, 1 through 14. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who will go before us. For this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him." Aaron said to them, "Tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people tore off their gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then he took the gold from their hands and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a cast metal calf. And they said, "This is your God Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." Now when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." So the next day they got up early and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink and got up to engage in lewd behavior. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go down at once, for your people whom you brought up from the land of Egypt have behaved corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made for themselves a cast metal calf and have worshipped it and have sacrificed to it and said, 'This is your God Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt.'" Then the Lord said to Moses, "I have seen these people, and behold, they are an obstinate people. So now leave me alone, that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them, and I will make of you a great nation." Then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, "Lord, why does your anger burn against your people whom you have brought out from the land of Egypt with a great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians talk, saying, 'With evil motives he brought them out to kill them on the mountain and to destroy them from the face of the earth'? Turn from your burning anger and relent of doing harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by yourself and said to them, 'I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heavens, and all of this land of which I have spoken I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever.' So the Lord relented of the harm which he said he would do to his people." God had abundantly blessed his people He brought them out from Egypt and sustained them in the wilderness, communed with them, and abode with them. But with Moses' absence on the mountain, the people very quickly forgot God's goodness and instructions. Not only did they forget God, but they also deserted him for a false god of their own making. Shamefully, they ignored God's first and second commandments and openly scorned them. It didn't take long before we see the iniquity of the people. As we saw in Lesson 8, the people had pledged to Moses, "All that the Lord has said we will do and be obedient," they said. And soon after, God called Moses up the mountain to give him the commandments and the law, written on the tablets of stone so that he might teach the people when he returned. God also gave Moses the pattern and the instructions for the tabernacle, as we saw in Lesson 9. On the mountain, Moses was alone with God 40 days and 40 nights, leaving Aaron and Hur in charge of the people. He was gone longer than the people anticipated, and consequently, they gave up on both God and their leader. They began to speak of Moses contemptuously, almost as a stranger. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him after such a short time. They lost faith in Moses and were no longer willing to wait upon God, who had always shown himself faithful. Patience is certainly a difficult virtue to cultivate in our own lives. Are you patient with God? Are you willing to let him have his way when he chooses not to work according to your schedule? The psalmist David shares both encouragement and wisdom on this subject in Psalm 27:14. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. First, they rebelled against Moses. Presumably, the people of Israel knew where Moses was going and why. And if they didn't know, Aaron and Hur certainly could have told them. But after a few weeks, they lost sight of the importance of what Moses was doing, and they acted as if they didn't know what had become of him. In fact, they decided they wanted another leader. They had not picked Moses. Therefore, this time they would be able to determine, make their own choice. It's always a problem when people elevate their wisdom over God's wisdom, believe that they know better than God knows, and choose their own way over God's way. And here, it should have been quite clear to the people that God had chosen Moses to be their leader. And they saw God part the Red Sea under his rod. They heard the very voice of God endorsing Moses. They had even begged Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but let God speak, but don't let God speak to us, or we'll die," they said. But now all of that was forgotten. And going beyond forgetting Moses, the people now had thoroughly dishonored him by doing something that they knew he would never have agreed with. They gathered together the gold for the purpose of building their own god. And this graven image was a blatant violation of the second commandment. Since they had chosen to follow the wrong leader, their actions were about to follow the wrong path. Unfortunately, Aaron would not stand up for his brother or for his God. Instead, he allowed the people to do what they wanted to do. He even cooperated with them. He made the golden calf and proclaimed that this vile man-made god was the power that had brought the Israelites out of Egypt. This was the man Moses had trusted to watch over the people in his absence. Many believers have been spiritually hindered by those who resist godly leadership. If your spiritual leaders are spending time with God and humbly leading according to his word, support that leadership. Be patient when the leader is waiting on the Lord, and commit to serving in any way you can in the meantime. The Israelites not only rebelled against Moses, they rebelled against God. Ironic it is that Aaron and the people did these awful deeds while proclaiming their loyalty to God. I mean, listen to Aaron as he announces tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. Did he really think that God was pleased that the people had demonstrated such contempt for Moses and that they had demanded Aaron manufacture gods for them? I mean, did he think that God appreciated the altar that he built and the offerings that the people brought? Did he think religion was a good substitute for righteousness? Often the first steps towards rebellion against God is rationalization. Even today, people believe God can be bought off or essentially bribed to overlook their sin and their self-will. Well, if my good outweighs my bad, they might reason, I'll be okay with God. People often don't recognize the small acts of rebellion in their own lives, but what starts as a small rationalization can be the beginning of a downward slide toward hardened and a rebellious heart. Think about this. A plane trip from Los Angeles to New York City is about 2,500 miles. And if you travel the same 2,500 miles at an angle of only like 1 degree off, you'll be 43 miles from where you intended to be. Tiny little error in direction when leaving Los Angeles could cause you to miss New York City by miles. Guard your heart from the sometimes hidden sin of rebellion and the rationalization that often leads to it. Be sure that you are fostering a genuine walk with God rather than simply adhering to the outward rules of a religion. I mean, totally surrender to God in His ways and trust His plan even when there is silence for a time. The people rebelled, and now let's look at the indignation of God. One of the greatest lessons to be learned from Israel's worship of the calf is that our actions do matter to God. The same God who knows the number of hairs on our heads and knows when a sparrow falls is obviously well aware when His people choose to go against His precepts. When God saw the actions of the people, He made both a statement and a command. He first stated that the people had corrupted themselves. Corruption can be defined as something that has been taken from its original or intended use. Man was created to worship God, and their worship of the calf was certainly a deviation from God's original plan, His original intentions. And the people were carnal. In today's text, we see 3 actions that reflected the carnality of the Israelites at this stage of their journey. These steps are sequential, and they lead to God's anger. Therefore, we must guard against taking this path in our own lives as well. First, the children of Israel turned aside quickly. They had pledged to obey God, but soon broke their vows. From their example, we learn to stay faithful to the course charted for us by God. As we walk with Him in patient trust, we experience the blessings of His presence. And as we abide in Him, He stirs our hearts to do His will. Luke 24:29 through 32 says, "And so they strongly urged Him, saying, 'Stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over.' So He went in to stay with them, and it came about when He had reclined at the table with them that He took the bread and blessed it, and He broke it and began giving it to them. And then their eyes were opened, and they recognized Him, and He vanished from their sight. They said to one another, 'Were our hearts not burning within us when He was speaking to us on the road, while He was explaining the Scriptures to us?' Not only did the children of Israel turn aside quickly, they also made a molten calf. Exodus 24:5 says, 'You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, inflicting the punishment of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me. Man has long tried to find substitutes for God and for truth. The theory of evolution, for instance, is man's attempt to replace the truth of creation. The science of ecology can be another example of man finding a substitute for God. And often this science leads to worship of the creation rather than the Creator. Perhaps you have personal substitutes for God in your own life: food, friends, entertainment, hobbies. While not wrong in and of themselves, they can be replacements for God when we go to them for comfort, distraction, or hope. Remember, today God is all we need. Don't settle for cheap substitutes. He is sufficient. And the third evidence of carnality in the hearts of the Israelites was in the worship of and sacrifice to their idol. They gave their gold for its making, and then they offered sacrifices on its altar. God alone is worthy of our worship and sacrifice. Today, we sacrifice for many things. Perhaps we make sacrifices so that our children can have special opportunities. We often sacrifice in order to later achieve some personal benefit. But when was the last time you worshiped your Savior by making a sacrifice, a loving sacrifice for Him? What are we willing to give the God who gave us everything? So the carnality of the people was revealed in three obvious ways. And we learn from the Israelites that the sooner sin is dealt with, the sooner fellowship will be restored. Sin is much like an infection. If caught early, damage can be minimal. But much like a splinter that is allowed to fester and infect the skin undealt with, will often require painful probing and digging. As we move along in our lesson, may we do so with a heart that reflects the psalmist as he prayed in Psalm 139, 23 and 24. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Here we see the people carnal and then charged by God. Moses had often pled on behalf of his people, but here God was so outraged by their actions that he didn't want to hear pleas for mercy. He told Moses to leave him alone so that he could consume the people and make a new nation for Moses to lead. Again, think back to the Garden of Eden for a moment. Adam and Eve could freely enjoy the pleasures of the garden with only one prohibition. They were not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God said that if they did, they would surely die. They did it anyway. God kept his word and would hear no excuses. Adam and Eve died spiritually on that day and would die physically eventually. God remembered mercy and covered their sin, but they could no longer live in the paradise God had made for them. In these stories, we see both God's justice and God's consistency in keeping his word to deal with sin. How wonderful to claim God's promises of patience and mercy. But we must also remember that he will not always plead with man. May we remember to turn to him before he must bring judgment in our lives. And now, it's always wonderful when someone speaks up on behalf of another, when someone makes intercession. Such was the case with Moses. God may not have wanted to hear from Moses, but Moses loved his people and did everything he could to save them. Moses gives a beautiful picture of genuine love and concern for another. He serves as a shining example of interceding on behalf of another. And we too have many opportunities to plead for help and mercy for others. May we do so from a heart of genuine care and Christ-like love, because he loved the sinners. And before Moses even left the mountain and saw for himself what was taking place in the camp, we see 3 endeavors on his part that we ought to emulate today. Moses pleaded with the Lord. Moses went directly to the Lord on the people's behalf. The Hebrew word translated as pleaded or besought means to ask urgently or fervently. And after dealing with the sin, Moses returned to the mountain, loving the people so much that he was willing to fast and pray for 40 days, begging God not to destroy them. Deuteronomy 9:18 and 19 say, "Then I fell down before the Lord like the first time. For 40 days and nights I neither ate bread nor drank water, because of all your sin which you had committed by doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger. For I was afraid of the anger and the rage with which the Lord was angry with you, so as to destroy you. But the Lord listened to me that time as well." This is the type of passionate prayer that God hears. James 5:16 proclaims, "The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much." Interestingly, God stresses the importance of fervent prayers. The "now I lay me down to sleep" prayers do not usually move us a great deal. They do not move God much either. The time Moses spent in fervent prayer ought to challenge believers today. Ask yourself, when was the last time I spent even 40 minutes praying for someone who was in spiritual danger? The following story found in Matthew 15 is another beautiful example of persistent and fervent prayer on behalf of another. Matthew 15:22 through 28. "And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, 'Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed.' And he did not answer her with even a word. And his disciples came up and urged him, saying, 'Send her away, because she keeps shouting at us.' But he answered and said, 'I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel.' But she came and began to bow down before him, saying, 'Lord, help me.' Yet he answered and said, 'It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs.' And she said, 'Yes, Lord, but please help me, for even the dogs feed on the crumbs that fall from the master's table.' Then Jesus said to her, 'O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you desire.' And her daughter was healed at once." Not only did Moses seek the Lord, he also cared about the testimony of the people. Moses loved God and cared what the world would say about God and about his people if he were to destroy them. The challenge seen here is not only to love and pray for God's people, but also to love the testimony connected with the things of God. Our actions have consequences and can either hinder or help our testimony with those who don't know the Lord. What might others think of your Savior based on what they see in you? When Peter and John stood before the council at Jerusalem, the evidence was plain that they had been with Jesus. They had a good testimony. Read with me Acts 4:13 and 14. "Now as they observed the confidence of Peter and John and understood that they were uneducated and untrained men, they were amazed and began to recognize them as having been with Jesus. And seeing the man who had been healed standing with them, they had nothing to say in reply. To a ship full of terrified sailors and passengers, the Apostle Paul was able to give a clear testimony as well. Acts 27:21 through 25 said, "When many had lost their appetites, Paul then stood among them and said, 'Men, you should have followed my advice and not have set sail from Crete and thereby spared yourself and this damage and loss. And yet, now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night, an angel of the God to whom I belong, whom I serve, came to me, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has graciously granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. As you go through your daily life, strive to continually ask yourself, what do others think of my Lord based on what they see in me? The third evidence of Moses' love for sinners is demonstrated by the fact that he reminded God of his promises. At a time when God was angry to a point of genocide, Moses chose to remind God of what he had said. It is a good thing to know what the promises of God are, so that we can come to the throne of grace and claim them. Psalm 89:34 says, I will not violate my covenant, nor will I alter the utterance of my lips. Numbers 23:19, God is not a man that he would lie, nor a son of man that he would change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do? Or has he spoken, and will he not make it good? And Joshua 23:14 says, Now behold, today I am going the way of all the earth, and you know in all your hearts and in all your souls that not one word of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed, that all have been fulfilled for you, not one of them has failed. A check is not money. It is a promise on a paper that can be exchanged for money. And you can be the possessor of a fantastically large check, but essentially you have nothing until you take the check to the bank and cash it in. And so we come boldly to the throne of grace and claim the promises of God. Hebrews 4:14-16 say, Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let's hold firmly to our confession, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things, just as we are, yet without sin. Therefore, let's approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace for help at the time of our need. Yes, he loathed the sin. When Moses arrived in the camp, he saw the sin of the people, and his anger burned. He was blazing with anger. He didn't excuse their sin as his brother Aaron had done, but rather he dealt with it. Moses removed the offending idol and destroyed it in burning it and grinding it into powder. He then poured the powder into the river and made the Israelites drink it. Sin may be pleasurable for a season, but it has a long, terrible, lasting aftertaste. Sometimes God deals with sin by giving us what we want and letting us find out the hard way how horrible it really is. The taste of a drink made with powdered golden calf must have been extremely unpleasant. And this showed not only Moses' contempt for the idol, but also his fury at the idol. In Numbers, we read about how God fulfilled the people's cry for meat. Numbers 11:18-20, and then 31-33 say, And you shall say to the people, Consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, Oh, that someone would give us meat to eat, for we were well off in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat, not 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, but for a whole month, until it comes out of your nose and makes you nauseated, because you have rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, Why did we ever leave Egypt? And now a wind burst forth from the Lord, and in it brought quail from the sea, and dropped them beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side, and a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. And the people spent all day, all night, and all the next day, and they gathered the quail. The one who gathered least gathered 10 homers, and spread them out for themselves all around the camp, while the meat was still between their teeth before it was chewed. The anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. Again, we see the dissatisfaction experienced when sin is present in our lives. After the idol was destroyed, Moses sent the Levites among the people to punish them. And Moses then stood at the gate of the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the sons of Levi gathered together to him. 3,000 men were subsequently slain. Moses loved the people so much that he later told God he was willing to give up his place in paradise so that his people might be saved. But he also would not tolerate their direct rebellion against God. He made it clear that the wrong choices made by the Israelites had serious consequences. And while it's easy to identify the sins of others, we must be willing to be just as harsh as Moses when dealing with our own sin. We must refuse to tolerate our own rebellion against God and always seek to keep a tender conscience toward him. Matthew 7:1-5 says, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' and look, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." Our sinful and selfish desires will not satisfy the longings in our soul. We must worship God with pure hearts and allow his blessings to flow. And in turn, we will see our deepest desires fulfilled in his will. Believers must constantly remind themselves that Satan is the great counterfeiter who tries to convince us to accept a substitute in place of God's plan. God's way at times seems to be a narrow way, but his way is always the right way. In his way, there are no regrets. Remember Proverbs 3:5-8, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your body and refreshment to your bones." Thanks so much for joining me today. Next week, we will hang out with Moses and his siblings. Until then, be determined to intercede for others in prayer. God bless you all.